Y'all ready?
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Of course.
The webinar has officially started. So you
Yay.
guys should be able to see who has joined on your side screen. Hi, everybody. Welcome, welcome. We're all so glad you're here. The chat should be up and going. So if you want to drop a message and tell us all where you're tuning in from, it'd be nice to see who's here and where you're from. I'll go ahead and also start the poll.
But it's done both of them.
I see, oh, did it? I see Ceci's here. Hi, Ceci. I hope you're feeling good.
Best
Hello,
wishes,
Ceci.
Jesse.
So excited for our chat, guys.
Yeah.
Greg
talk-
here. Evening, Greg.
Gary. Hi, Sue. Always good to see ya.
Pam's here. Nice to see you, Pam.
Pam Dorner.
Yeah.
Carrie from Pennsylvania.
Gary.
Wayne
Richard,
is here. Nice to see you, Wayne.
Wayne,
Richard-
what are you doing here?
I was going to say you've got a couple things for Wayne to tell him, but that's probably better off the air.
Yeah.
Richard, you have a nice glow about you.
I do have
just
the glow
telling you.
today. I did notice today's one of my Mondays are my glow day.
Yeah, you're
Good
glowing.
weekend.
Wonderful. Hey, Bruce. Hey, Susie.
Thanks for noticing, by the way.
Can't help it. I mean, of course, Jess glows, but that's, without saying. Luke, you're looking sharp yourself.
Well, I think we all are.
Good looking team here, right? Well, do we want to jump right in or do we want to give it a few minutes? Oh, I see Anna's here. She's been to Africa 13 times, has 2 more trips on the books,
She
and
should
is
be on
going
this
to
side of the mic.
Botswana,
Wow.
right?
I
Hey,
love
do you
it.
want to be on the panel? Yeah.
Hi, Richard.
Yeah, that's what Africa does. It just kind of sucks you in.
Keeps people coming back, right?
Well, I was supposed to be living there for 3 months, and then I was there nearly a decade. So
There you go.
That's wonderful. And you'll be talking about that a little bit, right?
yeah.
Webinar today.
Mm-hmm.
How fun.
People are pouring
Got
in.
somebody from Long Beach, Kenneth.
Bread.
Botswana 4 times. I'm jealous.
Yeah. Oh, Gary's went to the highest point in Africa and the lowest and the most western.
I like that, Gary.
Oh, Fred's here. Hi, Fred. He was just in Tanzania in February. It's nice to see all these familiar faces. Well, I imagine that you guys need no introduction, but I'm going to introduce you anyways. I'm glad everybody's here today. Thank you for joining us. This webinar is just as much a learning journey for me as it is for all of you. Today, we're going to dive into the magic of Africa with our incredible pros here. We've got Luke Dray, Richard Bernabe, and Marc Muench, who've all spent years traveling and photographing across this breathtaking continent. So one thing that I hear all the time is, I want to go to Africa, but I don't know where to start. And actually, I personally don't know where to start either. So I'm really excited that you guys are hosting this webinar alongside me and that we get to kind of dive in and talk about the best places to go. These guys are going to answer the questions and hopefully spark some inspiration along the way. As we go, of course, we'd love to hear from you. So if you have any questions about the destinations, feel free to just drop them in the chat. We'll be answering the questions throughout the session. And we've got a quick poll for you. We have 2 questions, and it seems that both of the questions have gone through at the same time. So if you wouldn't mind just answering the questions, we'd love to see what you have to say. So you guys ready to jump in?
Yeah.
All
Ready to
right.
Do
go?
this.
Richard, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. I'm Richard, and I am a teaching pro here at Muench Workshops. I do mostly wildlife. However, I'm inspired by most things that are nature. And I'll do anything anybody asks me to do anyway. But I am mostly inspired by wildlife and Africa in particular. And I am thrilled to be here tonight.
And we're thrilled to have you. Mark, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. I am Marc Muench, and I've been to Africa a bunch as well, but I was a landscape photographer, and I didn't really get into wildlife photography until I went to Africa. So I'm happy to be talking about it again. It's been an inspirational location, and it's a lot of fun to have Luke here because he spent so much time in Africa in places that I haven't been. So, Luke, thanks for being here too.
Yeah, I'm Luke. I'm a wildlife photographer, a photojournalist, um, one of the pros here at Muench Workshops as well. I've lived in Africa for nearly a decade, or just moving back to America after living in Africa for nearly a decade. And I've worked in more than 30 countries across the continent. And wow, it's just incredible. It's such a breathtaking place. It's fascinating. But yeah, let's dive into the webinar. And Jess, can you just share the screen?
Do you not see it?
No, I don't.
I do.
You do.
I
Yeah,
do.
it's there.
Yeah, you got it. Okay. So then we got I just wanted to talk about how we're going to be going through the webinar and talking about how we get pictures like this lioness here in Uganda and the leopard in Tanzania, which is the next slide. And then the cheetahs in the next slide and the gorillas here in Uganda on the next slide. All of these are animals that we can see relatively easily across Africa in different places. Lions are everywhere, leopards are everywhere, cheetahs are in many, many places. The gorillas we can see very easily in Uganda. And this elephant, Craig, fascinating elephant, one of the last big tuskers left that's in Amboseli. And I just, before we dive into more of the trip stuff, I wanted to ask Richard, who took this photo, you took this photo in black and white. What makes shooting elephants in black and white and some of the big five in black and white so special? What makes these pictures in black and white work so well?
So yeah, I didn't photograph it in black and white, but I did process it black and white. I think elephants just lend themselves to black and white photography for one really good reason, is that they don't have a lot of color in them to begin with. So most of the savanna elephants are gray, or they have different variations of gray in them, and some black and maybe some very light colors. So, but it really comes down to, most wildlife photography and all wildlife photography is, what am I trying to express to the viewer? What am I trying to communicate? And oftentimes color is a distraction. And I just recently did a newsletter where I talked about wildlife in black and white, and that forced me to really think about why I do certain images in black and white and why I do some without. So I had to think of the reasons, because before it was kind of intuitive. I just did it or I didn't do it. But in this case, I'm shooting upwards with 24mm lens. The elephant is gray. The sky is, you can see it's textured with clouds in the background. It's kind of gray. The only area that has color is the ground with the grasses, which kind of a yellowish golden color, and then the green bushes behind it. And the context of this photo, those things are distractions. That color would distract from my subject and those clouds in the background. So once I'm started working on the photo and I'm doing some processing, I go to black and white, and this speaks with a clear voice, if that makes any sense. And I bring the viewer's attention to where I want it to be, and not seduced by the color in the bushes and in the grasses.
I mean, it's an amazing photo, and the tusks, they look so powerful in this picture.
Richard, I'll add to it as well. This is a point of view that you get even from a vehicle. I know the camera is pretty low, but when you're in a vehicle, these guys are so big. They're just towering over you.
It's like he's one of the biggest elephants in Africa, I think.
It's just
at least the tusks
gigantic.
are. Yeah.
And this shows that. And
that's the angle of view actually enhances that. It puts, you could shoot down on an animal, you could shoot eye to eye, and you could shoot upward. And when you're shooting upward, you're exalting. That's psychologically what you're doing by the angle of view. And in this case, it really shows and how big he is, or at least expresses that.
It's beautiful.
And these elephants, there's not many of these big tuskers left, and this one's particularly famous. It's called Craig, and it's relatively easy. He's relatively easy to see in Amboseli They say he's about 50 years old and he's got many years left. Pretty impressive guy. So Africa is huge. As Jess said earlier in the webinar, that where do we start? It's 54 countries, almost 1.5 billion people, 2,000 languages. You can fit Texas into Africa 44 times. It has the longest river, deepest lake, Lake Tanganyika, um, and the largest desert in the world. So it's so vast, it's so diverse, it's got so much to offer. And despite the news, there are so many places that are safe to travel within Africa. And that's what this webinar is about today, about how special this continent really is. And if you just go to the next slide, Jess. These are the main sort of destinations that people go. We've got Morocco in the top left-hand corner in the northwest. Really, really great for culture and landscapes. And then we've got this sort of savanna belt that runs from Kenya in the middle there along the equator to Uganda, then Tanzania, then Zambia, Botswana, and Namibia, all the way down in the southwest down there. And this sort of belt of savanna that runs down through the equator there and through southern and central Africa is really incredible for wildlife viewing. And we go to many of them. Mark?
Sorry.
Yeah. So when we go there, it was years ago we first visited Africa. And I think the biggest shocker was understanding how wonderful safari camps are. You hear about it and people talk about it, but when you're actually sitting there, there's two things that you realize. Number one, the actual tent itself is not a tent. It's beautiful. But number two, it's when you actually go to the deck or the window and you look out upon the view, because you're not going to see a parking lot. You're not going to see anything, but in many cases, the great savanna. And oftentimes you'll see critters walking by. Zebras, I like to say zebra, that's an English term, Luke. You'll see all kinds of buffalo and such walking by. And so these are places that, as photographers, we really don't get to spend that much time living in the lap of luxury, but they are luxurious. And we get you up early and we take you out into the bush. But honestly, when you come back and you have a moment to sit down and enjoy these places, they really are special. So they're definitely, by a long shot, not basic.
Oh, sorry.
So a couple things to think about when you do want to go on safari. You want to have sort of a separate experience than the rest of your life. And it's not that it needs to be luxurious. All right. It's just that things are different and things that are usually not something you think about often. And, one of the things we've tried very hard to do over the years is to try and keep the group size small. And so that way it requires a certain camp that we go to. And so we go to camps that are smaller. And the whole experience just has a little more authentic feel, as if you're out there not on your own, but you're far away from everybody else. And that's been a key for what we've tried to do over the years. So a small group size is really important. We do have everybody in their own row in the vehicle. That's important so that when you're photographing, you have access to both sides, even though we tell the drivers, line everything up on one side. But of course, no matter what you tell the drivers, sometimes the animals show up on the other side. So you got to scoot over and react as fast as you can. That's the fun part about wildlife safaris. Oftentimes the drivers are able to share their wealth of knowledge, and they're naturalists. And so they definitely work hard at trying to get us into the right position so that you can photograph. That's key to what we do. And so, I think part of the small group is that having that understanding with some of the drivers And the staff of these camps, they're more attentive because there's fewer people around. And with that smaller group, we do things like fly you from one camp to the next instead of driving. There's a few places where it makes sense to drive because it's scenic, it's fun. You get a little bit of a feel for the countryside in different parts of Masai Mara. In Zambia, it's amazing driving around. You know, you see so much when you drive around outside of the camps, even going to the airport and back. But nevertheless, oftentimes we really want to get you from one camp to the next, so we fly. Um, the experience with wildlife, though it's changed over the years, there's multitudes of vehicles. They keep adding more camps to some of these areas. And there'll be times, Richard will tell you, you know, when the name of an animal that's coveted like a leopard is said over the radio, uh, Jeeps will come and surround that wild animal. And it's unfortunate because you hear this all the time. And so we've spent a lot of time looking for these areas that are just outside of the big named locations. And those are typically the private conservancies where they have these experiences where they'll only allow up to a certain number of Jeeps around a sighting. And that's key because, you know, you take a few pictures, enjoy your moment, and then you back off and let somebody else come in. And that changes the whole experience. In those places, we also have access to going off road. And that's key as well, so that we can get into the right location to photograph.
So, Mark, you took this image and it really captures the vastness of the plains. What tips do you have for creating a sense of scale when photographing in such an open landscape like the Serengeti?
Negative space.
For
Um, you know, it's funny. I grew up in the West, and every time I drive back through the West, Arizona, Nevada, actually, I wish I drove through more often, but each one of these places is just developed a little bit more. And so that feeling of the vast, wide open is so important. It's important to me, and I know it's important to the wildlife because they just thrive in that environment. And so I look at it as a challenge to capture that. And I think one of the key elements is that you have to have a place where it shows you that space. And Africa is one of those locations. It's not always, you know, the light for this shot was in the middle of the day. There was just some clouds passing by, so we get the shadows that created the separation of the giraffe with the sunlit savanna in the background. But essentially, it's a time when you might not photograph. But it's not always clear in Africa. Oftentimes in the summer months, they'll burn fires for brush. And so you only get the opportunity to photograph sunrise, sunset with a haze, which is beautiful, or you're close to the animal. But in those moments when you have that space, and this is in the Masai Mara, we're called the Spotted Plains, you can see that the little desert fig trees are scattered about in such a way that create that space. So negative space.
Thank you. So silhouettes can be a very powerful tool in wildlife photography, especially in places where big skies like the Serengeti. Richard, can you talk about how and when you choose to use silhouettes and what makes a strong silhouette image work?
Sure. This is not my photo, but I wish it was. But I would say probably in this case that the photographer didn't necessarily choose the silhouettes. I think the scene and the light chose the silhouette for him or her. You know, I don't care how good your camera is or how good you think your camera is. If you're shooting into a bright scene, into the sun, into a bright sky like that, you're not going to extract any detail from your subjects. And I'm just guessing by the shape of the head, it looks like it could be topes. So yeah, so you just meter on the sky and let everything else go silhouette. And what makes this image to me strong is, first of all, the color in the sky. It's a lot less effective. It's a lot less impactful if that were just a kind of a featureless gray sky. So you have the sun, you've got these bright colors in the sky. And then probably the most important things when shooting silhouettes is to have enough separation so that the integrity of the shape is preserved, the shape of these animals. So they're not, when you have this many, there's about 20 topies here, it looks like, you're not going to get perfect separation between all of them, but there is enough separation so that the viewer who wasn't there, that doesn't really know what's going on, can see them and recognize what they are. So if you could imagine all 20 of these topies all grouped together in a big bunch, it's not as beautiful aesthetically, and it certainly is much more difficult to, it's going to look like a big blob of black. So what makes this impactful is the separation, just enough separation between these animals so that that integrity of the shape is intact.
Thank you. It's beautiful. Let's see. So, Luke, can you describe how getting low to the water helped with this image that you took in Uganda?
Well, hippos, they're surprisingly, they're big animals. They're surprisingly hard to photograph or get a good photo of because they're either out of the water and they're too big and they're surrounded by really busy reeds or grasses or trees or something, or they're in the water and they're underwater and there's not much of them. So then they come up to breathe, or they sit in the shallows and you just see their little heads poking up. So they're best photographed from a boat, and getting low to the water, you get this sort of emerging hippo out of the water. And you've also got to balance the bank of the river or the lake, whatever the hippo is in, with the top of the head as well. So you've got to try and make sure you get that separation between the head and the bank. And getting really, really low enables you to have eye contact with the hippo, which is really, really important for, well, not eye contact, but that eye level with the hippo. And that's really important to kind of understand where the hippo's at and an idea of its environment. So I mean, yeah, you have to photograph hippos from the boat, and you have to get really, really low to the water. I was literally hanging out of the boat for this photo. But that's what you got to do in Africa.
Keep an
No
eye
fear.
open for other hippos as well, right?
Yeah.
So you don't get knocked into the water.
I was going to say, no fear of your camera getting wet. You just went
No,
for
I mean, it's up to you. I mean, cameras are there to be used, and you've got hold of the tripod foot, and you're using the LCD screen that they're all tilting nowadays, and you can get really, really low to the water. But then you don't want to get that low because you want that separation between the top of the head and the bank. And these heads, they're big heads. Um, so you don't need to get that low. You're probably, I don't know, a foot or half a foot above the water. So you're not right down low either. Otherwise
amazing.
you get the bank in the cutting the top of the head off.
Yeah. So, Luke, you've spent years living and working in East Africa. From your perspective, what is it that makes the Serengeti ecosystem so extraordinary?
Well, the Serengeti is just magical. It's a ecosystem that spans two countries. It spans northern Tanzania and then kind of cuts up into southern Kenya, and you get one of the last real remaining visual mammal migrations in the world, and you every year the wildebeest and the zebra and some of the other mammals migrate all the way around following the rains. And no matter, you can go to different places in the ecosystem every year and see a different part of this cycle. So in February, you can see the calving in the southern Serengeti or the central Serengeti as well. And you just they kind of wait until the right time, and they all kind of pop in 2 or 3 weeks in the middle of February. So you get all of these thousands of, well, millions of calves, wildebeest calves, just hanging around in the Serengeti, and that's really, really amazing to see. And then you can wait later into the year and see the migration in Kenya when it's just finishing in August or September and going into October, where they're crossing the Mara River, or they're following the rains into the Mara. And it's really visual. It's a really, really visual thing, but it's also it's a thing that you can hear and you can feel when you're driving through the plains and you come across a huge herd of wildebeest, and maybe they get spooked by a lion, or a pride of lions hunting, you can hear them galloping and you can feel the rumble under your feet because it's just such a large mass of animals. And it's very special to the two governments, Kenya and Tanzania, have worked so closely together to keep this movement of animals alive. You could easily put up a fence between the two countries, but they haven't done that. They've kept it open so that these animals can continue moving. I mean, other migrations across the world have been, other mammal migrations, especially elephant migrations across the world, have been interfered with humans building houses and cities in their migration paths, so they get stuck. But here you can still see it, and that's very, very cool. We go and see the migration in February. It's to see the predator spectacle of all the calves being born, and then it's just like a buffet for the lions and the leopards and the cheetahs as well. And then we also go up to Kenya for the tail end of the migration in Kenya, when the Mara is less crowded, and some of the remaining herds are still there in the corners of the Mara.
It's awesome.
Ah, that's the slide. But we can move on to the meerkats.
There we go. So Richard, you're heading out to photograph the meerkats in Botswana next year. Can you talk about how their behavior influences the way you approach photographing them?
Sure. Well, first, as far as their behavior is concerned, they are they have colonies, so you see a lot of group behavior. So what I would be doing in a shot like this, for example, is first getting low. Getting low, they're only about a foot high, or not much more than a foot high. So I talked a little bit about shooting angles earlier, about how shooting down can be condescending, and it's like a domineering point of view. Shooting upward can exalt the animals. Well, at least you want to be eye to eye, that mutual respect, and that allows your viewers to really create this emotional bond to your subjects. So getting down low would be the first thing. And like I said, they exhibit a lot of group behavior, so you're looking for interaction between individuals. And I like just compositionally that this image here, they're lined up like a pattern, like a repeating pattern. And you can't get that with many other types of animals. I mean, unless you're very, 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 very lucky, you're going to get maybe 2 or 3 rhinos lined up like this. But to have the whole group like this lined up in a pattern, but the low angle of shooting and looking for group behavior. And by the way, the collective noun for a group of meerkats is a mob, and you almost always find them together with others. And so here you see they got little babies in the front, but look, it's that group behavior that you're looking for, interaction between animals.
I got to
Very-
share that in the times I've been with them, they're often on a hunt, and they go scurrying about you can follow them for, at least we did, for 35, 40 minutes. And they're flipping rocks over looking for scorpions. And they flip a rock and they'll see a scorpion and they'll bite it, and the scorpion will sting them, but they're impervious to the scorpion venom. So they just keep eating them, keep chomping on them. And they're just so industrious. It's just a wonderful experience to get out there with them and be on their hunt. And I think we have the advantage in size, but it literally gives you the ability to understand a wildlife hunt. And even though it's a smaller size, you can still understand how they work and how the group behavior works, because they'll be looking at each other left and right to see if, their friend Joe just got one, or Sally got one over there. See if the scorpions are getting eaten.
It's awesome. Luke, you want to take it away?
And this is Richard.
Oh, yeah, Botswana. Well, it starts with the Okavango for me, and it's such a unique place. And I'm not going to say that it's better than the Serengeti or the Masai Mara or worse. I think they're on equal terms. It's just very different. So just to kind of describe what the Okavango Delta is you have the river, the Okavango River, coming out of Angola, out of the highlands of Angola, out of the mountains. It comes down through the mountains, through a short little section of Namibia, and then it gets to the Kalahari Desert in Botswana and just spreads out into the very arid desert, and it creates what is called an alluvial fan. And all that water of the river then spreads out into these small little waterways and wetlands and lagoons and little islands and riparian forests. And the wildlife is just so dense in this area. It's like a little oasis in the middle of this very dry, arid desert. And it's slower. It's not as crowded as you like if you were to go to Masai Mara. Just to give you an example, I've been 3 times at Okavango, and last year went with Muench Workshops. We were there for 9 days, and we saw 2 lion kills, which is like that's a bucket list for a wildlife photographer to see a lion kill, because so many of them happen at night. But we saw 2, and one of them was so close to the vehicle that our shadow from our vehicle was interrupting the image, because half it was in shadow, half the lions were in shadow, and half were in the sun. But that's how close they were. And we saw wild dogs on a hunt, and we saw tons of leopards. So it's just a wildlife dense place in this little Eden in the middle of the desert because of the water coming out of the mountains. Very, very, very special place. And we add on to the trip that I'm doing next year. We're going to spend our time in the Okavango Delta, and then we're going to go out into the Kalahari to shoot the meerkats, which we just talked about.
That's awesome.
So it depends. The water could change from year to year. Sometimes the water, depending on the rains that they had in Angola, so we could photograph from the land on the vehicles. We can photograph from boats, or we can do some boats and some land vehicles. So it's a very dynamic place.
Awesome. So Mark, can we talk about helicopters? It's something a little bit different from the game drives. How do you approach photographing from a helicopter? What tips do you have for making the most of that unique perspective?
Sure. It's a wonderful perspective. And oftentimes they'll offer in the Masai Mara a balloon ride, and that's fun as well. But being in a helicopter is, of course, a totally different experience. If you have never been in one, typically you want the doors on, but when you're photographing, you want them off. And the reason for that is that you have a clear, unobstructed view of what's below you. And in cases like that, you're flying over things that have this real rich geographic textures and oftentimes colors. And so you're photographing patterns and things from a different point of view. It's rare that you'll see wildlife photographed from the helicopter, but that does happen, especially here in Namibia. You can see the oryx walking across the dunes if you're lucky. That's a great shot if you're fortunate enough to be in the air when you see an oryx walking across the dunes. But the satisfying part typically is these amazing textures and the landscape that you see below you. What happens in a helicopter is the companies that we work with will remove the doors, and there's a few that have been able to leave the doors on with the adequate windows that provide space for a photographer to shoot from, but they're pretty large windows carved out of a helicopter door, and so that's quite unusual. Nevertheless, so it can be quite windy and drafty, and there's a lot of air that's coming from the front of the helicopter by you, and so you have to be careful to not get out into the wind if you're moving. That's only when you're going from A to B. When the helicopter finds something interesting, typically they'll stop. They won't hover, but they'll get really close and move slowly. There'll be a little less wind volume, and also a little bit less shake. So I always tell people it's very much like wildlife photography settings. In manual mode, you set your aperture to f5.6. That's usually the sharpest point on a 2.8 lens. And then your ISO is auto. And just compose. Just look at the shapes and look at what you're photographing and compose. And your camera will do the hard work for exposure. Oftentimes you're in a full harness seatbelt, and we have made sure in some cases, if depending on if we have both doors off on both sides of the helicopter, that will have an extra harness if you want. That does happen on occasion in places that are windy, but typically your seatbelt that is around your waist and over your shoulders is adequate for safety. We make sure that nobody's carrying anything, any superficial items, lens caps, that stuff is all gone or it's shoved into your pocket. You don't want anything flying out the window. So it's once you get up in the air for 10, 15 minutes, it's usually a highlight of anybody's experience because of the point of view.
So Richard, you've been to Namibia so many times over the years. What is it about that place that keeps drawing you back, and what makes it so special for you as a photographer?
Yeah, well, it's so different than most of the other African countries, for one, but it's about 95% desert. And many people think deserts are boring. I don't. I think deserts are fascinating, and I love photographing deserts. But when I think of Namibia, the one adjective that comes to mind for me is surreal. I think the landscapes are surreal. And even something like this, what you're looking at here in this image, is a ghost town called Komanskop. And Komanskop is an old mining town, a diamond mining town. The town was built around this very productive, very lucrative diamond mine. And what happened is in the 1950s, they just kind of got as much diamonds as they could, and to get more diamonds, it cost more than what they would get out of them. So they just abandoned the place in the 1950s. And so what you can see here is that because of how arid the climate is, it's fairly well preserved. I mean, the paint is still, you see the colors here, the blue walls. And at the same time, the desert is sort of reclaiming this town. And so the surreal part is that you have this old house, and the dunes are going through the house. The sand is coming through the house. Every time there's a windstorm overnight, you got this brand new untracked upon dunes going through the house. And it's just surreal. Seeing a house with the sand dunes going through it, it's a surreal experience. But this really applies to the whole country. It's a very safe country. It's easy to get around. And the landscapes, particularly the landscapes, are just surreal in every direction. And we're going to talk more about this in some of the upcoming slides, I know, but when I think of Namibia, I just think surreal. And when you have a surreal landscape, your just imagination can just take your photography in so many different directions.
Thank you.
Yeah. And so,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, I preempted you. I'm sorry, because I was just mentioning how surreal this place is. And Jess, what is the name of this place again?
This is Dray.
Good job. Good
I
job.
practice really hard.
That's Dray. Yeah, so this is Dray, and it's probably one of the most popular places in the Namib Desert. It's right in the middle of what is called the Sossusvlei Dune Complex. And these are some of the highest, I'm sorry, not some of the highest, they are the highest dunes in the world. So to give you some context, and I'm making this up, the two biggest dunes in Sossusvlei is Big Daddy and Big Mama. Those are the names of the two biggest dunes. And they are about the same height as the Empire State Building. So for those who have been to New York and Manhattan, that gives you some context as how big they are. So Dray is an old dry lake bed. So the main road that goes through Sossusvlei is actually a riverbed. It gets some water in the rainy season, but most of the time it's dry, and that's what you drive through. So before the sands moved and blocked the water from coming into Dray, when the river would rise a certain height, the water would come in here and allow trees to grow, and it was like an ephemeral lake. But once the sands blocked the water from getting access to it, it dried up, the trees all died, they're almost petrified, not like scared to death, but petrified as in ossified. And it's, again, surreal. I mean, this place is surreal. It's this white clay pan, flat surface with all these dead trees. There's at least 100 of them. And you're surrounded by some of the biggest dunes in the world, including Big Daddy, which is just beyond what you see the scene here. If I were to go wider, you would see the top of Big Daddy. And the color is orange. That comes from the iron oxide in the sand, and you could tell the older dunes are more orange than the newer ones. So then when you combine the orange color of the sand dunes with low angled warm light in the evening and in the morning, it's just bright orange color. So what you see in the background there is like a demarcation between the lit area of the dunes at the top and then the shadowed area of the dunes at the bottom. It's like a cooler orange color. And there's just a multiple number of compositions in there. I've got like 10 or 12 compositions in my back pocket that I share with my clients when we go in there. But then I say, go find something on your own. And invariably, somebody will find new compositions that I've never seen before, even though I've been there 25 or 30 times. So it's hard to describe until you get in there, but 3 of the 4 sides are just walls of sand. And you're down in this low area of this flat clay pan and these dead trees. That's what it's about.
So what do you like most about Namibia landscapes or wildlife?
Yeah, so Namibia is probably best known for landscapes. Wildlife is probably second, but you know, to really understand Namibia and Namibia's character, you have to look at the seasons. So when you look at the rainy season, or just like the tail end of the rainy season, like we have a workshop here at the bottom, you can see the landscapes of light and shadow, April 2026. At that time of the year, you want to concentrate on landscapes for a couple of reasons. Number one, you can have clouds. If you go in the winter, you may go the entire trip and not see a single cloud. So you got clouds, which gives you drama in the sky and colors and like that image in the upper right, color in the sky. And at that time, because there's so much water, it's hard to find wildlife, because your strategy when you go to Namibia is you're looking for water holes, because the area is so parched and the animals are congregate around water. Well, this time of year in April, there's so much water that the animals are scattered about and it's harder to find. So you really want to do landscapes at this time of year. Then when you move into the winter months, like June, July, August, you have less water. The water are concentrated in water holes, which means the wildlife are also concentrated in the water holes. And you have a lot of blue sky and not many clouds. So I would probably tilt the edge to wildlife in the winter and landscapes in like the late part of the rainy season. But
So
it's good to do
it's
both. It's actually a good combination of both at any time of year. But if I were to say landscapes in like March or April, tilt more toward wildlife in the winter months.
got it. So, Richard, is this one of
Yes,
your
ma'am.
pictures?
This is not one of my pictures, but I have some like this.
That's awesome.
This is very similar to what Mark was just talking about. This looks like it could have been shot from a helicopter, although I have similar images where I was up on the dunes shooting from one dune across to another. And you will find, even though there's hardly any plant life, you will find wildlife in these dunes. Mostly oryx, because oryx is just a special animal that has adapted to this type of environment. They can go for a long time without water. In fact, I saw I think a BBC documentary not long ago where sometimes the fog will roll in off the Atlantic Ocean, and the oryx will go up to the top of the dunes and they will face into the wind and just breathe the fog through their nostrils, and they will get enough moisture to hold them over for like weeks. It's amazing animals. So
Yeah.
you'll see a lot of oryx. They're also called gemsboks. Sometimes you'll see some springboks as well, but and some jackals. But for the most part, it's the oryx on those dunes. It's just a classic shot.
That's awesome. I think it's important to note that even if the workshop is landscape focused, it's important to know that we will also be photographing wildlife as well.
True.
So, Luke, you've spent years living and working across Africa, not just photographing wildlife, but also people and cultures. How do you approach photographing people respectfully, and what advice do you have for capturing meaningful, authentic portraits in communities across the continent?
I mean, I think what's really important is to, I mean, I worked for Getty Images before working with Muench, and I was covering current affairs as a photojournalist for the newspapers and news websites, all sorts of things. And I think what's really important is to first go into a situation without pictures in mind, okay? And we have to go in with an open mind, not with a set story we want to tell at the beginning. Um, like photographing the Maasai, there's certain things about the Maasai that are really important to them, and that's what they want to show, and that's what we should show. We should try and show that we should tell the story that they want to share with us, not something as visitors that we have preconceived in our head. So the Moran, which is the Maasai warriors, these young men, it's really the dancing and community is really important to them. So it's about asking them, where is it really important for you to, or where is it where is dancing really meaningful to you? And what attire is really important to you? And then you work with the communities to find a location that's good for photography, that's good for showing what their culture is about, and they take you there and they show you what's important to them, like the spears for protecting their cattle, because the Maasai are very often on the edges of national parks, like in Amboseli or in the Mara or in the Serengeti or in Gorogoro Crater. They're very often on the fringes of this land. This is where they're grazing their goats and cattle. So they have to have these spears and these things to prevent livestock loss, and then trying to photograph them as a community, not as individual, because they live in the bomas, which are these areas of like a little village. It's one village that has a clan's leader, and they're surrounded by acacia bushes that they've chopped down and put there to protect the cows at night. So you want to show that community in a really photographic way. And then if you go to the next slide, the women are what's really important to the women is the way they dress, and different beads and different garments show their different stature in society. So trying to photograph them in a really positive way. If you're taking a portrait of a lady like this, you don't want to be shooting up at them. Because it doesn't make them look nice. You want to be slightly above their eye level, looking down on them slightly, but their head needs to be up, and then they look really powerful and really respectable in their community. And that it's important when you're posing people, to photograph them in a way that makes them look and feel powerful. Otherwise, you make them look weak, and that's not something we want to do. And then the women, if we're doing a story, if we're trying to tell the story of the Maasai, you can take you've got the warriors, the first picture of the warriors. That's a really important part of their culture. And then you've got the portraits that really show what somebody is about. You're trying to capturing their soul in a picture. And then for the women, as I said a minute ago, the beads are really important. So if you're trying to tell a story, you want to show the different processes of their culture, and bead making is really important. So we want to photograph the making of the beads. And that, I mean, it's quite difficult. It's quite a boring topic to photograph, but you can see how the earrings are coming down. You can see what they're making. You can see the square jewelry in the top right-hand side is being made from the beads. That's really important to show that context. And then trying to show people in the landscapes. I think it's really this negative space. It's really important to show people in a wide context. You've got this guy sat on a rock here, overlooking all of the land that he grazes his cattle on. You want to show that story and give context about where these people live through the background of the picture. And just another thing, I get really picky about this in pictures, it's the separation. You see the horizon, you don't want that chopping halfway through the person's head. When you're taking pictures of people, everything needs to be clean. So you want to be moving up or down ever so slightly so that you always get that clean background behind the person. You get that complete silhouette of the individual.
Luke, I would call this an intended tangency.
Intended tangency. There we go. That's
Because
the
the
word.
top of the head is right with the horizon, so the lines come together as if it was intended. So very good composition, Luke. I would let you pass my test.
Well, brilliant.
Yeah, it's
Don't get
well
that from
done.
Mr. Muench very often, do we? And I think that's it on the Maasai. I was just looking at some of the comments that the questions. I think it's time for questions.
Well, did you want to talk about the workshop that you'll be leading?
Well, we're going there. We're going there in February 2027 to photograph the different tribes of Kenya. There's three main tribes. We're going to be doing the Maasai, which is this community I've showed you here. Then we're going to be doing the Rendeli, which are the camel herders in northern Kenya. A really fascinating, very different culture. They're a lot more nomadic. They move a lot more with the rains. And we go in February and March because once the rains start in the middle of March, you're never going to find them. They take their camels up into the hills, and you're never going to be able to find them. But then we also do the Samburu, which are very, very elegant people, and they wear these feathers on their crowns. And I'm really excited to be doing portrait sessions with all of these guys and learning about their cultures and traditions, and bringing a bit more of photojournalism to Muench Workshops because that's my background. Yeah.
It's going to be amazing, Luke. I know when we started thinking about doing this years ago, the thing that people go to Africa for is to photograph the wildlife, but then they come home and they have fallen in love with the people. And I can't tell you any safari I've been on where that doesn't happen. So much so that we've had participants in years past give things to the locals. You know, they're just emotionally charged after these experiences. And so to actually go there and spend time with them, and as Luke's describing very well, that you learn about them rather than trying to pose them. You're learning about them and what's important to them and how they celebrate their community and dance, you know, because I think many of us have seen the Maasai jump, and they jump high. Like, they're amazing to watch. I don't know how they do it, but it's always challenging for every person there to try and jump. But I can tell you it's really, really hard. And that's just one jump, and then they keep repeating it. But you know, a lot of that's kind of to celebrate for us, and it's not really exactly what they're doing on their own, unless they're doing it in a situation where it is theirs. It's they take great joy in sharing what they do, and so it's a lot of fun because you come away with an experience.
Yeah, it's really special. And these guys, they will show us how they interact with the wildlife. And because they live in such close proximity, they'll show us how they manage that human wildlife conflict in such a positive way. A long time ago, things were very negative between the national parks and the community and the tribal communities. But now things are very, very positive. And they want to show that. They want to show how they are. I mean, it is when we go on safari, we use in the Mara or the Serengeti, you use Maasai guides because they are the ones who know their environment, and it's nobody better to show us around than the people who actually live there, not the people who come in from the capital city to guide tourists.
Yeah. So you guys have all done safaris more than once. So for someone who did an amazing safari, last year or a couple of years ago, why should they consider returning?
I think the it's really difficult to explain this until like when you've been there once, you start to get this. But when you keep on returning, you've given up chasing those iconic pictures like this lion on a rock here. You've taken those pictures, and then you just you wait, you find a lovely landscape, and there's this magic about Africa that I've not experienced anywhere else, where you wait for you find a nice background, you find a nice piece of light, and you wait, and Africa will always reward you. There'll always be something that comes into the frame, or there'll be an element that comes forward, and it will just walk exactly where you need it in the composition. And you could be, it might take 10 minutes or it might take half an hour, but it will always happen. And once you've slowed down and you've done all the main pictures and you start thinking about composing and what instead of chasing but just seeing what's in front of you, it starts to reward you. I think that's what's really special for me.
And we have different locations too. Like I mentioned, the Okavango and how different it is from East Africa, the Masai Mara or the Serengeti. But even if you went multiple times to the same place, let's say you go to the Serengeti 6 times, it's going to be a different experience each time. It's just not like a a bad rerun of a bad sitcom, the animals don't have scripts. So each and every time it's a completely different experience. So I think at least once you should go, but every time you go, it's like it's a whole new safari.
I made the mistake of bringing my wife, and she's
I
now
don't see
been
how that's a mistake, but
4 times and wants to go back. Um, it's one of those places that just gets under your skin, and people complain about dust and bugs and whatnot while they're there the first time. Then they get home, and I've had people tell me that they're looking for the bugs in their bags. They just love it. There's nowhere else on earth where you can go and appreciate stuff like that typically. And so safari is not like going to the Hilton or the Hyatt or the Marriott. It's not. And that's what you have to know that about yourself to really truly appreciate it and enjoy Africa. It's the bush, and it's a great word for what it involves, which is the wildlife and what is around that wildlife. So it's a great experience.
that's awesome. So now we can move on to our question and answer. And I saw a lot of questions coming in as we were going through. One of the questions that I saw was, what gear and equipment do you recommend for safaris? Richard, I think you're a good safari guy to answer this question. I know your equipment.
Yeah, I tend to keep things simple, but that doesn't mean it's right for everything. So I usually take one telephoto zoom. I think a zoom is important because you're in a vehicle. You can't if you have a prime lens, you can't zoom with your feet like you can if you're on land. So oftentimes, in order to get creatively compose animals, sometimes with a lot of negative space or a little negative space, or the animal may be close to the vehicle, maybe far away from the vehicle, having the flexibility of zoom is important. So something like a 100 to 400 zoom or 100 to 500 zoom. I like light. I like to be able to be nimble and move quickly if I have to. And then I'll have a second body with a mid-range zoom, something like a 24 to 105. So if I were to go on a trip, and I'm going to be something like 100 to 500, light, easily hand holdable telephoto zoom, and then another body with a 24 to 105. And that gives me each lens on a different body. And so I can react quickly for different circumstances, different situations, get the environmental portrait, get the type portrait, different animals at different distances. And I won't miss a shot with that simple little kit right there. It's really all you need.
So true. Just butt in real quick and tell you that in 2000s, I watched pretty much every safari company try to invent the perfect pod for your camera off a safari vehicle. Like, it's got all kinds of linkage, and you're trying to get this camera set up so that you don't have to hand hold it. And everybody's tried, but I've never seen a really great solution. The sandbag is great, and that also is the biggest problem there is it always ends up right next to the line. After it falls out of the vehicle, we have to go back an hour later to get the sandbag because it's always near a lion. Nevertheless, no linkage, no device really works that well to mount your camera on a safari vehicle. So handheld is the best. And so what Richard said in being light and nimble is very important because you'll see an animal and the animal won't be in the perfect spot. So of course you want to be ready, locked and loaded with the focus locked and exposure all set in case he moves. And so sometimes it's not within seconds. So you have to be ready and you have to have your camera up. So the lighter it is, the better. The big, huge 600 millimeter prime lenses, they're great. They're beautiful, but they're heavy.
I would also say I've seen a lot of people in the chat saying they've been to Africa 12, even more times than that. So what I think is one of the most underrated lenses, or one of the most underrated focal lengths, is something like an 85 1.4 or 135 1.8 or f2 if you've been on safari many, many times and you're confident, because you can get these incredible critterscapes, as Mark would call them, where you have the animal really, really pin sharp, and then you have all this beautiful blurry, something like a bokeh behind the animal, beautiful blurred background, and it really puts the animal in the context of its environment, in a way that an aperture of f4 or f5.6 can't. I think it's really beautiful, especially with things like gorillas, where you're in the low light as well. If you're under the canopy of the trees, it's really special because they're really close. And lions and leopards can be really close as well. And having that close, wide open lens can be really, really beautiful for the right moments.
Well, thanks, guys. I sure learned a lot. I hope everybody watching also learned something new and is feeling inspired. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can send us an email to info@muenchworkshops.com, or you can give us a phone call, and any of us will be happy to answer any of the questions that you might have. The recording will be available in the next 24 hours. That will be sent to you by email. And again, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. Thanks again for joining us, and have a wonderful evening.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.